Many of you watched tonight's CBS movie Judgment Day, the John List story. It was about the New Jersey accountant who slaughtered his entire family and managed to escape arrest for 17 years.
Tonight's first case, the oldest we've ever pursued on America's Most Wanted. The suspect, John List, is accused of murdering his family.
He killed his family, according to him, for the purpose of sending them to heaven.
I felt that even though I killed the family, I could still get forgiveness eventually from God.
Later determined that List shot his son 10 times. He claims, though, that John, like the rest, did not suffer.
And that was the one thing I was trying to prevent, was there feeling any wounds or suffering, at the last moment. How compassionate, huh?
Imagine a picture-perfect family, the embodiment of the American family in the 1970s. A hard-working husband and father, a stay-at-home wife and mom, 3 wonderful children, and a sweet grandmother, all living in a beautiful 19-bedroom home in a true devout Lutheran family. Tragically, however, nothing turns out to be what it seemed. This is the heart-wrenching story of the List family murders. Hi guys, welcome to KW Lawholic. It's Kayla, and I'm back again with another story, another crazy, unbelievable one, but I can't wait to get into it. If you're new, welcome, and if you're not, hi guys. Let's get right into the story. So if we start on the family background, it's with John List. He is 46 at the time, and he is married to his wife, Helen List. She is 47, and they have 3 children, 16-year-old Patricia, 15-year-old John, and 13-year-old Frederick. John List was raised by his parents, Elma and his father, but primarily from his dad. He was raised in a way to believe that the world was dangerous and unstable. His dad cared a lot about authority and raised him to be the same way, to understand that a man takes care of his business and his family, and that you should never have to succumb to any type of help or welfare. In 1943, after John List graduated high school, he immediately enrolled into the United States Army, and he served there as a laboratory technician during World War II. After he was discharged in 1946, he eventually went to the University of Michigan, and he got a bachelor's degree in business. And then he later went and got his master's in accounting, and that eventually led him to have a very good accounting job. Together, Helen and John did raise their children in a very strict household that had a lot of punishment. There were incidences where neighbors, family, and friends would say that John would scream at the kids on the highest level possible and just get so angry out of nowhere. But besides that, it was a pretty regular, normal American family. On the day of November 9th, 1971, John List murdered his entire family. He used a 9mm Steyr 1912 semi-automatic handgun and his father's Colt .22 caliber revolver to commit the murders. John, in the morning, he saw the kids off to school, and then while in the kitchen, when Helen was sipping her coffee, he shot her in the back of the head. He immediately went upstairs to the 3rd floor of their 19-bedroom mansion to his mother's room and shot her right in the head above her left eye. After that, he went back downstairs and waited. He waited till his daughter Patricia and his youngest son Frederick came home, and he shot them from behind in the head as well. After that, he made a sandwich and left to cheer on his oldest son John at his soccer game before driving him home, and once he entered the house, he shot him in the chest. And sadly, he ended up having to shoot John multiple times because it was found out that John fought back against him.
List decided to pick him up at school.
He had a soccer game, so I went over and watched the soccer game. He seemed to be playing a good game and enjoying himself. And then we came home together in the car.
Father and son walked in through the kitchen door, and the 15-year-old placed his gym bag on the counter. His father then came up behind him and shot him in the head. But this final murder would not be as quick as the others.
After that, he took his wife and kids' bodies and laid them out on sleeping bags inside of the family's ballroom. And he left his mother's body upstairs because hers was too heavy to carry. After that, he went inside of his study, and on his desk, he wrote a 5-page letter that would explain why he did, and so he could be understood just a little bit. He did eventually clean up the crime scene, and he also cut and removed his face out of every single picture in the house. No picture in the house had his face on it anymore. He canceled all of the milk, mail, and newspaper deliveries. And he also contacted his children's school by note stating that they would be going away for a few weeks to North Carolina to visit their maternal grandmother because she was sick. After that, he had then decided to turn on all the lights on in the house. He turned the radio station to religious hymns and basically gospel instrumentals, and he went to sleep. And then the next day when he woke up, he walked out the front door and vanished. The family's bodies were not found till almost a month later on December 7th, 1971. It took so long mainly because of two things. The first was that the family was very reclusive. Neighbors said that the family was very unassuming and that John specifically was very uptight and conservative. He wasn't very fond of neighborly friendships. They were also noting that he did act strange on certain occasions, like mowing the lawn and cutting the grass in a full suit, or leaving out to get his daughter, who was at the police station one night just because she was out late with friends, and he would scream her head off and like make her do all types of weird punishments that kind of gave on the lines of torture. The second reason that their bodies weren't found is also because of the notes he gave everyone. He gave those to his school to explain where the children would be, but he also wrote notes to their part-time jobs. So back then, people weren't really checking for everyone if you did that. They're thinking they're on vacation, they're visiting family, they're just not home. So it wasn't too out of the ordinary. That was until the neighbors started to notice, like, wow, all of the lights in the house are constantly on. And they just hear loud music. They see no physical activity. The light bulbs in the house, room by room, started to burn out. And once that happened, they contacted the authorities. The cops had entered the house through a window in the basement because it was unlocked. And then they found the 5 bodies. They found Helen, they found the children, and they found the mother. One of the key pieces of evidence that did kind of explain everything was when they found the letter. The letter was weirdly addressed to his pastor, and in the letter, John said that he killed them out of mercy, and he was saving the souls of the people he loved. His reasoning was that he wanted to protect them from going to hell if they decided to deviate from his religious teachings that he instilled in them, because they were a devout Lutheran family. He wanted to protect them and make sure they reached heaven. He told his pastor in the letter that he did pray over their bodies because that was the least he could do. The letter to his pastor also provided instructions of what to do with the bodies. He gave the pastor an apology stating that he was sorry to add more additional work to the pastor's workload, and he did ask for low-cost funeral arrangements. Police then found his car parked at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City, and they found that it had been parked there since November 10th, which was the day after the killings. But they didn't find any evidence that proved that he actually got on a flight or even purchased a ticket. They didn't know or have any clue where he could be. So they did a little bit more investigation, asking neighbors and friends of the children. There was one day after a heated argument that John threatened to kill the entire family. And on another occasion, Patty told her friend that her father asked her, how did they want to be buried? Did they want to be buried or cremated? And that's a very weird thing to ask your young children. Patty had also told her friend that she truly believed that her father hated her. Now let's recap. We have a family of 5, the List family. Father killed his wife, 3 children, and mother. He already confessed to it in a letter. He wrote out his reasoning for did it, and then he made sure that everything would not be found. He cut himself out of pictures. He canceled deliveries, anything that could kind of pinpoint where he could be. He basically got rid of it. And then he vanished without a trace. So the cold case finally kind of had a breakthrough. And this breakthrough came through a show that is very popular, especially during that time, called America's Most Wanted.
In 1986, outside Denver, Colorado, 61-year-old fugitive John List had recently remarried and was living a quiet life as an accountant named Robert Clark. Neither his wife nor his friends had any idea that nearly 15 years earlier, List had murdered all 5 members of his immediate family.
I just more or less existed and just go along and do what has to be done, I guess, to just survive.
Back in Westfield, New Jersey, residents were well aware that the perpetrator of one of the most notorious crimes in state history was still at large.
The people in Westfield thought about him every year on the anniversary. Every paper in the state of New Jersey covered the story. There's 2 years, there's 5 years, there's 10 years since the List murders. Where is he now?
The FBI had long since joined the search for John List, and he became one of their most wanted fugitives. Working on the List case, had collaborated with local media on several occasions in the past, with no success.
Good evening from Washington, D.C. It's Sunday, June 4th, and I'm John Walsh.
But by 1988, a new national television show was beginning to capture the public's attention. The program was America's Most Wanted, and authorities believed it might be their best opportunity to finally find John List.
In May 1989, the authorities came up with the idea to bring the case towards the producer of the show, America's Most Wanted, Mike Linder, to see if he could maybe just help find it. And now Mike Linder, he was very interested in the case, but he wanted to get an accurate description of List because it had been so many years. And he gave the task to Frank Bender, who is an expert forensic artist. He specializes in creating busts of a person's features and faces, and that gives a really accurate description of how someone would look with age progression. So that's what he did for John List. The bust came out to be a masterful depiction of how John would look. And no later than on June 1st, 1989, only 2 weeks after the episode aired on May 21st, 1989, they had a hit. Inside of the episode, they were able to arrest John List in Richmond, Virginia. A tip came in from a woman living in Richmond, Virginia, who said that her neighbor had a very striking resemblance to the bust they showed in America's Most Wanted of her neighbor, Robert Clark. And she thought maybe it should be looked into seriously. She also told the authorities it was kind of weird because he also devotedly attended church and he was an accountant. And we know that John List, he was a top VIP, vice president of his company, accountant, and he went to church and instilled those values and those religious beliefs into his family. The police had then went to the Clark's home and they spoke to the wife. And when they spoke to her, that ended the 18-year search for John List. They had finally found him and caught him. So now that this 18-year mystery was back on and active, List still kept up his alias of that he was Robert Clark. He didn't know who a John List was. He kept his alias on board, even all the way up to when they extradited him back to New Jersey. They presented him with concrete evidence, including his fingerprints that matched their military records from when he was in the military and evidence that they found at the crime scene. Even then, he still said, "No, I'm not John List. I'm Robert Clark." It wasn't until February 16th, 1990 that he finally disclosed his true identity. He finally came clean and said, "You know what? I'm going to explain why I did what I did and my reasoning behind everything." He told the police that after he murdered them and drove to the airport the next day, he parked his car and then caught a train to Colorado. And there in Colorado, he assumed the identity of Robert Clark. And he lived there for a while, working little odd jobs, not doing too much, until he finally got another job as an accountant and moved to Richmond, Virginia. He basically started a new life. He was very quiet in his life, though, still going to church and praying. He told the authorities and when he was in interviews how everything played out and why he did it. He said that he was having financial difficulties. He would take money from his mother's bank account and divert it to pay the mortgage on the house because he didn't want anyone to know what he was going through to avoid humiliation. To avoid even more humiliation, he didn't tell his family that he lost his job. He kept up the ruse that he was still employed and he would get dressed for work every morning, leave out, and either go to the train station and read the newspaper all day, or he would go on a few interviews to try to get work. But mostly he spent his time in the train station, and he would eventually go back home at the same time that he would if he was still working. He did that for months, even to the point where he started making his kids get little part-time jobs to teach them maturity and how to be self-sufficient and independent, when really he just needed the extra money for their household.
Get dressed up in a suit and drive his car to the train station and take the train a few stops so people thought John List was still viably employed and he was doing well.
Eventually, though, at his trial in 1990, his lawyer tried to say that he suffered from PTSD from the war and that he was going through a midlife crisis when he did all of this. The judge said that there was no excuse for murdering 5 innocent people, and not just 5 innocent strangers, your family, 5 family members of yourself who you love and are there for. It was no excuse in the judge's eyes. In an interview with ABC before his sentencing, he told them that he shot his kids in the back of the head because he didn't want them to suffer. He wanted to be quick and painless for them so that they wouldn't really remember any of it. And then they asked him about how he repeatedly shot John. And he said that he doesn't know if he didn't want him to suffer or if he was just releasing built up and pent up tension. He also was asked why didn't he kill himself? And he believed that if he killed himself, he wouldn't get to heaven. And all he wanted to do, in his words, was get to heaven to finally reunite with his family where there would be no more pain or suffering for them to worry about. In the end, he was sentenced to 5 life terms of first-degree murder. Did eventually spend 18 years in prison before he died at the age of 82. This story is just super tragic to me. I can't wrap my mind around how a father could do this to his wife, his children, his mother, and his excuse is that he's doing it to save them, all because he doesn't want to ask for help, or he thinks that just because he lost his job, it's the end of the world. And I would like to just give my prayers and condolences to the rest of their family members that were alive, and to know that he finally was caught. They finally got to justice. His children and wife's and mother's names can speak to justice that they deserved for so long. If there's something I learned about this case, is that people will do some crazy things if it makes sense in their minds to them. And I wish that the police could have just took a little bit more initiative or effort. Despite it being so long ago in the 70s, they didn't have too much technology or ways to find people, but I just wish they could have done a little bit more to figure it out faster, to make sure he possibly didn't do it again to someone else. It's super scary, and he really just needed help. When you go to war, you need to be there for those people coming back, to get them the help they need to be able to enter society again and not worry about problems like this or have their mind twisted because of the things they've been through. Even though I don't think that's his case, that's just a point that kind of stuck out to me. So thank you guys for listening to my next story, my captured case of the List family murders. If you have any other stories you're interested in, please comment them down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you with the next video.